In 2012, a lone hiker was making his way through the mountains near the small town of Delta. As he navigated the uneven ground, something unusual caught his eye. At first glance, he assumed it was just a pile of discarded debris, maybe an old tarp or trash someone had dumped illegally. He moved closer to take a better look. That's when he realized what he had actually found. What lay partially hidden among the rocks was not garbage. It was human. Over the following days, forensic experts conducted a series of thorough analyses. When the results finally came in, they confirmed what investigators had both hoped for and dreaded. It was Paige Bergfeld. Paige was born on a warm spring day, April 27, 1973, in the heart of Atlanta, Georgia. Growing up in a loving household with strong family values, Paige developed a sincere desire to help others. After graduating high school with honors, Paige made the pivotal decision to enroll in the University of Florida's nursing program. It was there, amidst textbooks and hospital rotations, that she met Howard. The bond they had built during their university years endured, and in 1995, just a year after Paige's graduation, the couple decided to marry. But as time passed, a fundamental difference between them came to light, one that would challenge the very foundation of their union. Paige had always dreamed of becoming a mother. Howard, on the other hand, had a different vision. For him, a child-free lifestyle wasn't a compromise, but a principle. Though they tried repeatedly to find middle ground, through long conversations, personal reflection, even counseling, no agreement could be reached. Paige couldn't abandon her dream of motherhood, and Howard couldn't see himself as a parent. The emotional strain grew heavier with each passing month. In 1997, after 2 years of internal conflict and growing emotional distance, Paige and Howard made the difficult, deeply painful decision to part ways. After the divorce, Paige found herself at a turning point. She had followed a conventional path most of her life: education, marriage, career. But now she felt the need for a fresh start. Craving independence and a break from the past, she made a bold and unconventional move. Under the alias Madison, she began working at a high-end Denver nightclub. Though this chapter of her life was unexpected, it gave Paige something she desperately needed: autonomy, financial freedom, and a clean slate. It also introduced her to someone who would change the trajectory of her life yet again. That someone was Rob. Rob was known in Denver's business circles as a man with potential, a soon-to-be heir of a successful family-owned enterprise. The attraction between Rob and Paige was immediate and intense. Their relationship moved quickly, and within a year, in 1998, they were married. This time, Paige's heart was filled with hope that she had found the life partner who shared both her love and her dreams. Together, they moved into a spacious, upscale home nestled in the picturesque suburbs of Colorado. Over the next few years, she gave birth to 3 children. She embraced motherhood with all her energy, becoming not just a devoted parent, but the emotional anchor of the entire household. By 2001, Paige's life appeared to be everything she had once longed for: a loving husband, 3 beautiful children, and a home filled with laughter. But as the years went on, unseen cracks began to form beneath the surface. Rob's business ventures, once thriving and full of promise, began to falter. A series of financial setbacks took a toll on the Dixon family's fortune. What started as minor concerns turned into severe financial distress. Eventually, the situation became untenable, and Rob filed for bankruptcy. By 2004, the strain had reached its peak. The couple's relationship, once passionate and supportive, had become fraught with conflict. One evening, during a particularly intense dispute, Paige reached a breaking point. In a state of fear and emotional distress, she picked up the phone and called emergency services. Her voice, trembling with emotion, conveyed both fear and concern. She reported that Rob had used threatening language during the argument, remarks that deeply unsettled her and left her worried for the safety of their children. It wasn't a call made in haste, but one born from genuine fear for the well-being of those she loved most. Several officers from the local police department arrived at the Dixon residence without delay, fully prepared to intervene and ensure the safety of both the woman and her children. However, when officers reached the residence, they encountered an unexpected scene. Standing at the front door were Paige and Rob, side by side. Their expressions were calm, perhaps overly so, as if rehearsed. Paige stepped forward and politely informed the officers that everything was under control. She claimed the disagreement had been resolved and that there was no longer any reason for concern. With no visible signs of harm and no legal grounds to press further, the officers had no choice but to leave. Approximately 1 year later, in a far more urgent and emotionally charged state, Paige made another call to the police, this time reporting something much more serious. According to her statement, an altercation had taken place between her and Rob. Paige said the confrontation occurred while she was holding their youngest child in her arms. The report described Rob displaying sudden aggression, behavior that crossed a dangerous line. Rob was brought in for questioning and subsequently charged with third-degree assault. As the legal process moved forward, he eventually agreed to a plea deal, admitting guilt to one of the lesser counts in exchange for avoiding a more severe sentence. The case was closed, and Rob did not serve time behind bars, but the impact of the situation lingered long after the court's decision. The relationship, once fueled by love and ambition, had devolved into a constant stream of tension, arguments, and emotional strain. Eventually, it became undeniable. Their relationship was no longer sustainable. Recognizing that it would be healthier for both themselves and their children to go their separate ways, Paige and Rob decided to finalize their separation. With quiet determination, Paige balanced parenting, work, and the ongoing stress of rebuilding her life. She remained deeply devoted to her children, making sure their daily routines remained stable and loving, despite the emotional challenges. Then came June 28, 2007. On what initially seemed like a typical summer day, Paige left her children in the trusted care of her close friend Carol. Carol, who often worked part-time as a nanny, had long been a reliable figure in the family's life. Paige had some errands to run and promised to be back soon. Those who knew her well consistently described her as punctual, responsible, and meticulous, especially when it came to her kids. So when the hours passed and Paige neither returned home nor responded to calls, a sense of unease quickly settled in. At first, everyone hoped there had simply been a delay, but as Friday turned into Saturday, and still there was no word from Paige, the concern grew into alarm. It was Paige's young daughter, 8-year-old Jess, who took the first real step toward action. With a maturity well beyond her years, Jess insisted on going to the local police station. Accompanied by Carol, the girl reported her mother missing. Soon, a large-scale search was launched. On Sunday, July 1st, 2007, just days after Paige vanished, a red Ford Focus was discovered parked in an unfamiliar area. It was immediately identified as belonging to Paige. Even more disturbing, the vehicle was in flames. Firefighters quickly extinguished the blaze, but it was already too late. The car was heavily damaged, and hopes of finding Paige inside, or any straightforward clue, were dashed. What raised immediate suspicions was the nature of the fire. The area surrounding the vehicle showed no signs of other ignition sources. The damage was isolated exclusively to the car. The district attorney took particular interest in this detail. He publicly stated that the fire appeared to be intentional, and not the result of any accident. Even worse, the district attorney did not rule out the possibility that she may have already lost her life. Forensic teams combed through the remains of the vehicle, examining every scorched surface for clues. They looked for anything, a fingerprint, a fiber, a trace of fuel, that might explain what had happened to Paige or where she had gone in those final hours. Sheriff later provided a crucial insight into one of the most disturbing aspects of the investigation. According to him, setting a vehicle on fire is a tactic that is sadly not uncommon in serious criminal cases. Arson is often used not just to destroy property, but to eliminate potential evidence that might otherwise offer critical leads. In Paige's case, it was clear that someone wanted to make sure no such evidence remained. Despite the extent of the damage caused by the flames, forensic specialists were still able to extract valuable clues from what remained of the car. During the investigation, one small but telling detail stood out. The driver's seat had been adjusted all the way back. This seemingly minor observation turned out to be quite revealing. The setting suggested that the last person to operate the vehicle was likely taller than Paige, who stood at an average height. It strongly indicated that someone else had most likely been driving her car before it was abandoned and set ablaze. Investigators found that specific pages were missing from Paige's personal planner or notebook, those corresponding to the dates between June 26th and June 29th. These were precisely the days surrounding her disappearance. While the physical search pressed on, The police also launched a parallel investigation into the people closest to Paige. Their goal was to reconstruct her recent movements, conversations, and state of mind leading up to the day she vanished. Naturally, her ex-husband Rob was high on their list. At the time, Rob was living in Pennsylvania, far from Colorado. But due to their volatile history, including the 2 previously filed domestic incident reports during their marriage, investigators knew they couldn't overlook him. During questioning, the detectives focused on establishing a clear timeline. They wanted to know exactly when Rob had last traveled to Colorado, whether he had any recent contact with Paige, and whether anyone could verify his whereabouts. Rob firmly maintained that he had been at his home in Pennsylvania on the day Paige disappeared. He emphasized that he had nothing to do with her vanishing and had no reason to wish her harm. After the interview, Rob surprised some observers by becoming actively involved in the search efforts. His behavior gave the impression of someone genuinely concerned, although opinions about his motives remained divided among the public. Meanwhile, attention also turned to another figure from Paige's past, her first husband, Howard. Interestingly, after her split from Rob, Paige had rekindled communication with Howard. Howard revealed that he had seen Paige shortly before she vanished. According to his statement on June 28th, the very day Paige disappeared, the two had met in Eagle County, a location that was roughly halfway between their respective homes. Howard explained that the meeting was business-related, though it also gave them an opportunity to catch up in person. After spending a portion of the day together, the two parted ways, and according to Howard, they continued to talk via phone after the meeting. When he later learned of Paige's disappearance, Howard said he didn't hesitate. He contacted emergency services immediately. He expressed a firm belief that Paige would never have simply vanished, and especially not without contacting her children. Cell tower data showed that Howard's phone had indeed been in the Denver area that day, several hours away from the site where Paige was last seen. That verification allowed investigators to confidently rule him out as a suspect. Only a few days after the shocking discovery of Paige's burning car, a new and unexpected lead emerged, this time purely by chance. A motorist had pulled over to the side of a highway southeast of the city to fix a flat tire. As he stepped out of his vehicle, something caught his eye in the grass. A checkbook lying half buried near the edge of the road. Curious, and sensing that it might be something important, the man immediately contacted local authorities. Scattered in the nearby brush and along the roadside were several of Paige's personal effects. Among them were her medical records, insurance documents, and other items tied directly to her. The presence of these belongings, miles away from the original crime scene, suggested that someone had gone to considerable effort to disperse her possessions, either to mislead investigators, or perhaps, as some speculated, to send a message. Sheriffs later remarked that some pages from the checkbook had been torn out, mirroring the earlier discovery of missing pages from Paige's planner. The small but revealing discovery of a business card lying along a rural stretch of highway would ultimately turn out to be the key that unlocked an entirely new and unexpected chapter in the mysterious case of Paige's disappearance. The card featured the name Carrie, a name that meant nothing to detectives at the time. But a few calls and cross-references quickly confirmed what no one had imagined. Carrie was a name used by Paige herself. This startling revelation opened up a side of her life that no one, not even her closest friends or family, had known existed. Further investigation revealed that Paige had a second phone, completely separate from her personal and family communications. This phone, investigators soon realized, was used exclusively for matters related to her second identity and the secret work she conducted under the alias. With access to that phone, detectives obtained call logs that offered a glimpse into her last known interactions before vanishing. The final outgoing call from that device was made on the evening of June 28th, at approximately 9 p.m., just hours before Paige was reported missing. Based on the contacts listed in her call history, police began to assemble a list of individuals who may have had some connection to Paige's disappearance. 7 names quickly stood out as potentially relevant, and investigators started the process of interviewing each person. Among those names was one that drew immediate and heightened attention: Lester. Lester had a documented criminal history, and his past included a felony conviction that had resulted in a 5-year prison sentence. Though the specific nature of his earlier offense was not initially disclosed, it was enough to raise red flags. In addition to his background, Lester's physical characteristics and behaviors began to line up in troubling ways with earlier accounts shared by people who knew Paige. One particularly concerning piece of information came from Carol Lindholm, Paige's longtime friend and trusted nanny. Carol recalled a disturbing story that Paige had once shared with her. On that occasion, Paige had been leaving her office building late in the day. As she walked toward her Ford vehicle in the parking lot, she noticed an unfamiliar white car parked directly behind it, effectively blocking her exit. Paige, frustrated but determined, got into her car, maneuvered out of the tight spot, and in the process, slightly tapped the other vehicle. Rather than address the situation, the unknown driver fled the scene without a word, leaving Paige shaken and confused. But now, that same white car had resurfaced as a potential clue, particularly because Lester was known to drive a similar vehicle. They began to explore the theory that Lester, perhaps obsessed with Paige. To better understand the nature of their connection, police thoroughly examined Paige's call records and client logs. It turned out that 55-year-old Lester worked as a mechanic, specializing in the repair and maintenance of recreational vehicles. Paige had been introduced to him through her secondary line of work. His behavior had reportedly made her uncomfortable, so she asked Carol, who occasionally provided services for clients, to meet with him. Carol initially hesitated, but eventually, perhaps to help her friend or out of concern, she agreed and went in Paige's place. As detectives delved deeper into Lester's background and routines, they uncovered a detail that sent a chill through the investigative team. Lester's repair shop was located almost directly across the street from the remote location where Paige's burned car had been discovered. Lester was brought in for another round of questioning. He willingly agreed to speak with detectives, appeared cooperative, and did not request legal representation. On July 5, 2007, he sat for a detailed interview at the sheriff's office. Throughout the session, Lester answered each question calmly and denied having any knowledge of Paige's disappearance. He maintained a friendly tone and even volunteered to provide his fingerprints and a DNA sample, which he claimed would prove his innocence. But one detail stood out to investigators, and it wasn't something Lester said. It was his height. When compared with the position of the driver's seat in Paige's Ford, the seat that had been pushed all the way back, Lester's tall stature was a perfect match. Eventually, detectives obtained a warrant to search Lester's home and workplace. What they found during that search only deepened their concerns. Among the items recovered was a disposable, unregistered mobile phone, commonly referred to as a burner phone. Records showed that multiple attempts to contact Paige had been made from this phone on the day she vanished. When confronted with the phone and its activity, Lester flatly denied ever owning such a device. However, the evidence was building. Investigators examined the packaging found in Lester's residence and traced it to a specific supermarket on North Avenue. From there, they reviewed surveillance footage from the store's security cameras. What they saw left little room for doubt. Lester was captured on video purchasing a disposable phone, matching the one recovered in his home, just days before Paige's disappearance. Despite the clarity of the images and the fact that the timeline aligned perfectly, he continued to deny any involvement or knowledge. His unwillingness to admit what was plainly visible to everyone else only increased the pressure surrounding him. With mounting circumstantial evidence, growing inconsistencies in his statements, and a series of connections too strong to dismiss, Lester became the central figure in a case. With the case stalled and leads thinning out, authorities hoped that a trained service dog might be able to uncover new clues, or at the very least, confirm existing suspicions. The results were both revealing and unsettling. The dog responded immediately upon entering the vehicle. Investigators interpreted this as further confirmation that Paige had likely been in the car during or shortly before it was set on fire. But that wasn't all. The dog also reacted to another scent inside the vehicle, a scent it later matched to Lester. If accurate, it meant that Lester had been inside the car at some point, either before or after it had been torched. However, despite this development, the case was still lacking what prosecutors call direct evidence. While the clues were mounting, none of it, on its own, was definitive. There were no eyewitnesses placing Lester at the scene of a crime, no surveillance footage of the act itself, and most critically, no body to confirm that a murder had even taken place. All the evidence, as compelling as it seemed, remained circumstantial. One of the lead investigators on the case later expressed his frustration in an interview. Without a confirmed cause of death or a recovered body, the burden of proof was simply too high. As a result, no formal charges were filed. The case was, reluctantly, shelved. For several years, the investigation languished in limbo. Detectives continued to follow up on tips, and Paige's family clung to hope. Her loved ones, especially her children, were left without answers or closure, navigating a life filled with uncertainty and grief. Then, in an unexpected turn of events nearly 5 years later, the mystery took a major shift. In 2012, a hiker exploring a remote mountainside near the town of Delta stumbled upon something unusual among the rocks and dry brush. At first, he thought it was just discarded trash. But upon closer inspection, he realized he had found human. Alarmed, he quickly contacted local authorities. The area where the remains were found was particularly notable. It was not far from the road where Paige's personal belongings, including her checkbook, medical documents, and other items, had been discovered years earlier. Forensic teams were dispatched immediately. Suspicions were confirmed after a series of meticulous forensic tests. It was Paige. Lester wasn't arrested immediately. It would take another 2 years of careful preparation, new analysis, and strategic legal planning before charges were officially filed. In November 2014, Lester was formally arrested and charged with kidnapping, first-degree premeditated homicide, and second-degree murder. The charges represented years of work and a renewed commitment to securing justice, but the legal process was far from over. It wasn't until July 2016 that the trial finally began. The prosecution alleged that Lester's motive stemmed from a toxic mix of entitlement, obsession, and anger. According to them, Lester had become upset after being unable to schedule a follow-up appointment with Paige. One of the key witnesses during the trial was Lester's ex-wife, Lisa, who testified to his past behavior and volatile temperament. She described an earlier incident that revealed Lester's capacity for retaliation. According to Lisa, after their relationship ended, Lester had not accepted her decision to move on. He tracked her and her new partner down, confronted them aggressively, and eventually assaulted her. She was able to escape and filed a report with local authorities. One final piece of testimony came from Lester's current wife, who also took the stand. Initially, it was believed she might offer an alibi, but her testimony took an unexpected turn. When prosecutors showed her the surveillance footage from the supermarket where the disposable phone had been purchased, the same phone that was later linked to Lester's attempts to contact Paige, she identified her husband in the video. Though Lester had denied being the person captured on the security cameras, his own wife recognized him. On September 9, 2016, after weeks of tense courtroom proceedings, impassioned testimonies, and meticulous presentations of evidence, the jury in the case against Lester returned to the courtroom without a consensus. Despite the time and effort invested in the trial, they were unable to reach a unanimous verdict. As a result, the presiding judge had no choice but to declare a mistrial, a legal outcome that, while not an acquittal, meant the trial had effectively ended without resolution. Over the next several weeks, the prosecution team took a fresh look at the entire case file. They revisited every detail, every interview, every piece of surveillance footage, every technical report. The goal was to ensure that no aspect of the case had been overlooked, and that the second trial would be even more compelling than the first. On November 21, 2016, Lester once again stood before a judge and jury to face the charges brought against him. The video, captured by cameras near the RV repair shop where Lester worked, showed a white Chevrolet vehicle circling the area where Paige regularly parked her car. The white vehicle, investigators confirmed, was registered to Lester's wife, who, notably, had been out of town during that period. Prosecutors argued that this allowed Lester to use the car without raising suspicion. One particularly telling moment of the trial came when new testimony was introduced regarding the night Paige went missing. According to his wife's statement, Lester left their home for approximately an hour that evening. When asked about it later, he claimed that he had forgotten to turn off the lights at his workshop and had driven back to check. But the timing of his unexplained absence aligned almost precisely with the suspected time frame of Paige's disappearance, further deepening investigators' concerns. On December 2, 2016, the courtroom heard the final statements from the prosecution and defense, each urging the jury to weigh the evidence carefully and to consider the consequences of their decision. Weeks later, on December 27, just as the year was drawing to a close, the verdict was announced. Lester was found guilty on all counts, including first-degree murder, kidnapping, and other related charges in connection to Paige's death. Though Lester continued to deny any involvement, never admitting guilt or explaining his actions, the sentence was clear and unambiguous. The judge, emphasizing the severity of the crime and its lasting impact on the victim's loved ones, sentenced him to life imprisonment without the possibility of parole, Still, Lester chose to file an appeal, asserting that legal errors had occurred during the trial and that the verdict should be reconsidered. In June 2022, the appellate court issued its ruling. The three-judge panel upheld the original verdict, stating that the trial had been conducted fairly and that the evidence presented was sufficient to support the jury's decision. On a quiet morning, at approximately 9 a.m., a man in a state of clear distress, who identified himself as Dr. Scott Sills, placed an urgent call to the 911 emergency service. His voice trembled as he reported a dire situation: a woman having fallen down a staircase. He described her condition as critical, stating that she was lying unconscious at the scene, with no visible signs of life. In an effort to provide immediate assistance, Dr. Sills followed the dispatcher's instructions and switched his phone to speaker mode. Emergency paramedics were promptly dispatched to the location. However, upon their arrival at the scene, the responders were met with a heartbreaking reality. Medical team determined that the woman had already succumbed to her injury. Suzanne Sills was born on July 30, 1971, in the vibrant city of Philadelphia, Pennsylvania, a place known for its rich history and bustling energy. From an early age, Susan displayed an exceptional aptitude for academics, excelling in her studies with a keen intellect and an unyielding determination to succeed. Her academic prowess led her to pursue higher education at a prestigious business school, where she earned her MBA with distinction. Armed with her degree, Susan embarked on a career in business management, quickly establishing herself as a formidable presence in the field. It was during a challenging period in her personal life, while seeking treatment for infertility issues alongside her first husband, that Susan's path crossed with Dr. Scott Sills, a compassionate and highly skilled specialist. What began as a professional interaction soon blossomed into a profound connection, rooted in shared aspirations and mutual admiration. Their bond grew stronger over time, leading Susan to make the difficult decision to end her first marriage. In a whirlwind of emotion and hope for a brighter future, Susan and Scott married, uniting their lives and dreams in a partnership that seemed destined for greatness. Together, the couple embarked on an ambitious venture, founding a private reproductive clinic that would become a beacon of hope for countless families. Susan, with her business expertise, took on the critical role of managing the clinic's operations, overseeing marketing efforts, and handling the intricate financial aspects that kept the practice thriving. Meanwhile, Scott dedicated himself to the medical side, leveraging his expertise to provide cutting-edge fertility treatments. Their complementary skills and shared vision propelled the clinic to remarkable success, earning it a stellar reputation as a trusted resource for couples longing to start or expand their families. The clinic's achievements were a testament to their hard work, with stories of joyful parents and healthy babies spreading far and wide. Beyond her professional accomplishments, Susan was a devoted mother to the twin children she and Scott welcomed through in vitro fertilization. Her love for her children was boundless, and she poured her heart into nurturing them, balancing her demanding career with the joys and challenges of parenthood. Success and the picture-perfect life she seemed to lead, Susan's personal life was not without its struggles. Behind closed doors, her relationship with Scott began to show signs of strain. Around 9 a.m. on a quiet Sunday, a clearly distressed man identifying himself as Dr. Scott Sills placed a call to 911. His voice, while urgent, remained surprisingly steady as he informed the dispatcher that his wife had suffered a fall down a staircase in their home. He reported finding her unconscious and unresponsive at the base of the stairs. Following protocol, the dispatcher asked him to place the phone on speaker mode and began guiding him through basic life-saving procedures while emergency personnel were en route. When paramedics arrived shortly thereafter, they quickly determined that Susan was, tragically, beyond saving. Her condition suggested that she had been deceased for some time. One detail stood out. A cooking pot was found near her body, positioned unusually upright, as if it had not fallen naturally during a struggle or tumble, but had been placed with care or intent. This detail would later become a critical point of contention in the investigation. Scott offered an explanation that seemed both oddly specific and, to some, implausible. He told the responding officers that Susan had been preparing to walk the family dogs that morning, a task she performed routinely. According to him, she may have tripped on the stairs, fallen, and somehow become entangled in her scarf, suggesting that the dogs, possibly tugging on the scarf's ends, might have caused accidental suffocation. However, Investigators were immediately skeptical. The story, while not impossible, seemed unlikely given the physical evidence and the state in which Susan was found. Detectives turned their attention to verifying Scott's account. The staircase in question stood over 13 feet tall. A fall from such a height could indeed cause serious injuries. But Susan was 45 years old, physically healthy, and known for her cautious and methodical nature. Friends and family were adamant that she was familiar with every corner of her home and would not have been careless, especially while descending the stairs she used daily. Urged upon closer examination of the scene. The placement of certain items and the lack of chaotic evidence suggested that something was amiss. Adding to investigators' unease was Scott's demeanor. While he complied with law enforcement requests, allowing his home to be searched, submitting to DNA collection, and answering all questions, he remained notably composed. Simultaneously, a separate line of inquiry began, one focused on gathering insights from the couple's two children, 12-year-old twins, Eric and Mary Catherine. A detective sat down with them gently, aiming not to alarm but to understand. The twins spoke of their mother's recurring migraines, describing how she occasionally retreated to Mary Catherine's room during these episodes to escape light and noise. On the previous night, Susan had experienced one of these painful attacks. She had taken a pot with her, a precaution in case she became nauseous, along with her usual pain medication. Both children described their household as generally peaceful, emphasizing the routine nature of their mother's migraines. They said that Susan had gone to rest early, leaving the master bedroom empty. Around midnight, Scott reportedly went to check on her, only to find her already asleep. Mary Catherine, knowing her mother would not want to be disturbed, decided to sleep in her parents' room instead. At approximately 4 o'clock in the morning, the stillness of the suburban home was broken by raised voices coming from the master bedroom. Young Eric Sills, just 12 years old, was abruptly awakened by what appeared to be a heated exchange between his parents, Dr. Scott Sills and Susan Sills. His sister, Mary Catherine, also stirred from her sleep, alarmed by the intensity of the voices. When Mary Catherine hesitantly asked her father what had happened, Dr. Sills calmly reassured her that it was merely a small disagreement. Although Scott's explanation seemed simple enough on the surface, law enforcement officers investigating the events that followed found themselves with more questions than answers. During his official interview with detectives, Scott elaborated on the events of the early morning. He explained that when he went to check on Susan around 4 a.m., he found her hunched over her laptop. Despite battling a severe migraine, she was still absorbed in work, something he said was typical of her unrelenting drive. Concerned about her health, he claimed he urged her to rest and step away from the screen. But Susan, known for her resolve, allegedly refused to stop working, insisting that she needed to respond to several important emails. Their disagreement, though brief, apparently left both spouses frustrated. Eventually, Scott said, the matter settled, and the family returned to bed. By 6:30 a.m., just 2.5 hours later, Scott suggested to Mary Catherine that they enjoy a refreshing morning swim in the backyard pool, something the family occasionally did together. Mary Catherine agreed, but what she saw when she left her parents' bedroom changed everything. There, at the base of the staircase, was her mother. Susan was unresponsive. A long scarf was wrapped around her neck, and a metal pot was lying nearby. Scott told investigators that the scarf had been used regularly by Susan during her migraine episodes. He said it helped her block out light and sound, and had previously belonged to Mary Catherine. According to his theory, Susan had the scarf on as a form of comfort. The pot, he explained, was likely carried with her in case she became nauseous, as was often the case during her most painful migraine attacks. However, many aspects of the scene did not add up. Investigators began to express growing skepticism about Scott's narrative. As detectives examined the scene more closely, their doubts intensified. They noted that the scarf was tightly wrapped around Susan's neck in a manner inconsistent with accidental entanglement. The position of the pot also appeared unnatural, as though it had been set down intentionally, not dropped during a fall. Further complicating matters, Scott had visible injuries, a fresh laceration across his forehead and a significant bruise on his arm. When asked, he stated these were sustained during a car repair the previous afternoon. He even claimed that Eric had helped him in the garage. But when investigators asked Eric about this, the boy gave a different account. He remembered working with his father on the vehicle, but firmly stated that Scott had not hurt himself during their time together. This contradiction raised red flags for detectives, who were becoming increasingly concerned that Scott's story may not be entirely truthful. Another inconsistency emerged when Eric recalled seeing his mother placing the family's dogs into their crate the night before. This was unusual, especially considering her weakened condition. Why would Susan have planned to walk the dogs so early in the morning, particularly while dealing with a migraine severe enough to force her into bed hours earlier? As investigators continued to comb through the home, forensic experts discovered biological material, possible DNA traces, inside the bedroom where Susan had gone to rest. The presence of these stains surprised the children, particularly Mary Catherine, who told police that the room had been completely clean when her mother entered it the night before. The finding didn't match with the tidy and quiet environment Susan had sought for relief from her pain. Despite the mounting circumstantial evidence, law enforcement was cautious. The material found in the room was suspicious, but inconclusive. No arrest could be made without definitive proof of foul play. Instead, authorities continued collecting evidence, submitting everything, from the scarf to the pot, from Susan's laptop to her phone, for forensic testing. The preliminary medical examiner's report came just 4 days after the incident. Disappointingly, it offered no clear resolution. The findings were ambiguous and did not confirm the cause of Susan's passing beyond all doubt. A more in-depth toxicology screening, along with an analysis of tissue samples and trace materials, could take weeks, if not months. Investigators were determined not to rush to conclusions, given the highly sensitive and complex nature of the case. In the meantime, law enforcement began focusing on mapping out Susan's social and professional life in greater detail. They reviewed her recent messages and calendar events, hoping to find context for her emotional state in the days leading up to the tragedy. Their goal was to understand whether stress from work, or something more personal, might have contributed to the events of that morning. Susan's professional circle was broad and included numerous physicians, administrators, and former patients. After speaking with several individuals, detectives eventually found a colleague who described Susan as increasingly anxious and withdrawn in recent months. This witness, who had worked with her on several cases, recalled Susan voicing concerns about personal control and balance within her marriage, details that seemed consistent with the picture her close friends had painted earlier. As for Dr. Scott Sills, those who knew him professionally described a different man, cheerful, accomplished, and always composed. His students at the university where he occasionally lectured remembered him as an energetic and kind teacher, someone with a bright future and an enviable resume. He had graduated from high school at the top of his class, completed a law degree, and then pivoted into medicine, where he specialized in reproductive health, a path that eventually led him to meet Susan. When news broke of Susan Sills' sudden and tragic passing, her friends, colleagues, and family were overwhelmed by grief. In those first few days, nearly everyone who knew her believed the incident to be nothing more than a heartbreaking and inexplicable accident, an unfortunate series of events that had led to a fatal fall. The initial shock swept through her personal and professional circles, silencing doubts and encouraging mourners to focus on her memory rather than the circumstances of her death. However, as detectives began their formal investigation and started interviewing witnesses, something unexpected occurred. Many individuals, friends, clinic staff, neighbors, had already been in contact with her husband, Dr. Scott Sills. What they reported to investigators gave cause for concern. In their conversations with Scott, they noticed his stark refusal to speak about Susan's death. His reluctance to discuss even the most basic details of what had happened sent up red flags for those closest to the family. To them, it didn't appear to be the quiet mourning of a devastated spouse. It felt evasive. This behavior only amplified the suspicions of investigators. What had initially been treated as a potential domestic mishap was now quickly developing into what authorities believed could be a far more serious case. Based on inconsistencies, unusual behavior, and emerging details, detectives began to consider the strong possibility that Susan's death had not been an accident at all, but rather a deliberate act. As they delved further into Scott's statements, investigators noticed a troubling pattern. When speaking about his late wife, Scott often praised her business acumen. He referred to her as a capable co-founder and a smart manager, someone who was invaluable in operating their fertility clinic. But what struck many observers as strange was his complete avoidance of acknowledging her roles as a wife and mother. They spoke of her professionally, not personally, as if their shared life had been more of a corporate arrangement than a marriage built on love and family. Detectives began gathering statements from clinic staff to get a broader picture of Scott's behavior before and after the incident. One particularly observant nurse, who had long worked alongside the doctor, shared her observations. Before Susan's death, Scott had been, in her words, a rather average man in appearance. But within weeks of the tragedy, she noticed a startling transformation. He had undergone a hair transplant and was suddenly taking much more care in how he dressed and presented himself. His physical appearance was no longer an afterthought. He began posting regularly on social media, updating his profile pictures, and frequently sharing personal updates. It didn't take long before he began a relationship with a new woman. To outsiders, it seemed that Scott had moved on with surprising speed, perhaps too quickly for a grieving widower. Though no one could fault someone for seeking companionship, the contrast between his behavior and the timeline raised eyebrows within the community and within law enforcement. Yet, despite this growing collection of red flags, the hard evidence needed to charge Scott remained elusive. The pieces were there, but none were sharp enough to cut through the uncertainty, at least not yet. In 2018, the case took a significant turn. After many months of meticulous laboratory work, the coroner's office completed an advanced forensic analysis of the DNA evidence found in Mary Catherine's bedroom, the place where Susan had reportedly gone to rest during her migraine. The results confirmed the presence of both Susan's and Scott's DNA. While not definitive proof of wrongdoing, it offered important confirmation that Scott had been physically close to Susan in the location where she was last seen alive. Then, on August 8, 2018, nearly 2 years after Susan's passing, detectives returned to the Sills family home. This time, their visit was not a routine follow-up. It was direct. One of the lead investigators looked Scott in the eyes and asked him the question that had loomed over the case for months. "Did you kill your wife?" Scott's reaction was immediate and telling. His demeanor changed. He grew visibly uncomfortable. Beads of sweat appeared on his brow, and he adopted a defensive posture. Still, he denied any involvement, maintaining that Susan's death had been a tragic accident. While police now felt confident that a crime had occurred, the burden of proof remained high. To build a prosecutable case, they needed more than instinct. They needed hard evidence. That's when they turned to Susan's digital devices, particularly her smartphone and laptop. Investigators believed that Susan, a meticulous and thoughtful woman, may have left behind some clues. Their hunch paid off. Within her messages and private notes, detectives found multiple instances in which Susan expressed deep dissatisfaction with her marriage. She had written that she no longer trusted her husband and was considering leaving him. Susan worried that her departure would threaten his financial stability and professional reputation. Further examination of Scott's own phone revealed something equally disturbing. Among his saved files was a screenshot of a photograph that investigators believed may have played a role in Susan's decision to leave. Dated August 30, 2016, carried personal significance, and its context, though not publicly disclosed, was described by authorities as potentially damaging to Scott's personal or professional life. Investigators believed that jealousy, combined with fear of public embarrassment or business loss, may have motivated Scott to act irrationally and violently. Adding to their concerns, police discovered that Scott had contacted a life insurance company the very next day after Susan's death. He had attempted to claim a $250,000 policy payout. The timing alone raised suspicions, and given that the circumstances of Susan's passing were still under investigation, the insurance company denied the claim due to potential foul play. Finally, on April 25, 2019, over 2.5 years after Susan Sills was found lifeless at the base of her staircase, Dr. Scott Sills was formally arrested on suspicion of murder. At the time of his arrest, he was en route to perform a medical procedure. Authorities took him into custody, setting bail at $1 million, which Scott posted without delay. He was released pending trial. The long-awaited trial began in November 2023, 7 years after Susan's death. In court, Scott Sills' legal team presented an alternative theory of events. According to the defense, Susan had fallen down the stairs due to the disorienting effects of her migraine combined with medication. The house dogs, confused and excited by the commotion, had tugged on her scarf, unintentionally tightening it around neck. Unexpectedly, the deceased's daughter, Mary Catherine, spoke out in support of this version. Now 19 years old, Mary Catherine was no longer the young girl detectives had questioned, on the morning of her mother's death. She had grown into a thoughtful and articulate young woman, and despite the tragedy that had shattered her family, she maintained a strong and steady relationship with her father, Dr. Scott Sills. As the trial entered its most crucial phase, Mary Catherine came forward, not as a witness for the prosecution, but in defense of the man now on trial for her mother's murder. According to her statement, on that fateful morning 7 years earlier, she did in fact witness something unusual. She remembered seeing the family's dogs playing near her mother, specifically pulling at the ends of the scarf Susan had wrapped around herself, something the girl hadn't understood at the time. The memory had remained dormant for years, buried in confusion. Mary Catherine explained that she never mentioned it to investigators during the original interviews because no one had asked her directly, and as a child, she hadn't realized the potential significance of what she had seen. Her voice shook in court as she explained, "I was only 12. I didn't know what mattered and what didn't. I didn't think it was important back then." She also noted a crucial detail regarding the scarf, one that aligned with the defense's timeline. When she and her father attempted to assist Susan before the paramedics arrived, they had removed the scarf from her neck while trying to perform first aid. That, she claimed, was why it was found at a distance from her body, rather than tightly wrapped around her, when emergency services entered the home. To support Mary Catherine's claims, the defense team commissioned a new forensic examination of the scarf. This time, DNA testing confirmed the presence of canine biological material on the fabric. Trace elements from the dogs, hair follicles, and microscopic skin cells were found embedded in the weave of the material. The defense presented this as proof that the dogs had interacted with the scarf in a physical way, likely pulling on it just as Mary Catherine described. In addition, the toxicological analysis presented during the trial lent partial credibility to the theory that Susan may have suffered an accidental fall. According to the medical report, multiple medications were detected in her bloodstream, including a combination of painkillers and sedatives. These drugs had been prescribed for the treatment of her severe migraines. Furthermore, in the days leading up to her death, Susan had reportedly eaten very little and complained of constant fatigue. The defense argued that this physical frailty, combined with medication, may have caused disorientation, making a fall down the stairs more likely. Despite the new evidence, the prosecution remained steadfast. They called Mary Catherine's late revelations into question, suggesting her recollection might be shaped by loyalty to her father or by the passage of time. Prosecutors emphasized that while the scarf may have had traces of the dogs, the overall circumstances surrounding Susan's death still pointed to something far more intentional. One key argument put forward by the state involved the absence of physical evidence on the staircase. Experts testified that if Susan had actually fallen, there should have been biological traces, blood, tissue, or fibers, on the staircase itself. But investigators found nothing. The staircase, with its 13 steps, showed no physical sign of a traumatic fall. According to the prosecution, this absence supported the theory that Susan had not fallen naturally, but was instead placed at the base of the stairs to stage an accident. Prosecutors also focused on the troubling position of Susan's body. During the initial emergency call, the 911 dispatcher had clearly instructed Scott to begin CPR on a flat, hard surface, standard procedure in any resuscitation attempt. Yet when first responders arrived, Susan's leg was still resting on a step, and her position had not been moved. According to the prosecution, this strongly suggested that Scott had not genuinely attempted life-saving measures, but had instead posed her body to reinforce the narrative of an accidental fall. The state then returned to its central theory, motive. They argued that Scott was deeply unsettled by a photo Susan had shared publicly shortly before her death. This image, innocuous to outsiders, allegedly sparked feelings of jealousy and insecurity in Scott, emotions that festered and eventually exploded into a fatal confrontation. The prosecution emphasized that Susan had reportedly intended to leave Scott and take her share of the clinic with her. Text messages and journal entries recovered from her devices revealed that she felt emotionally stifled and financially strapped. The prosecution also questioned the credibility of the statements made by the couple's son, Eric. While Eric had earlier told investigators that his father had not sustained any injuries while they worked on the car together, the state argued that Eric could have been mistaken or even unconsciously influenced. After all, both Eric and Mary Catherine were young and traumatized at the time, making their observations susceptible to distortion. Scott Sills, throughout the trial, chose not to testify in his own defense, a decision that puzzled some and angered others. For 3 weeks, the courtroom was filled with conflicting narratives, emotional testimonies, and scientific evidence that offered as many questions as answers. When the closing arguments concluded, the courtroom fell silent as the jury was given their instructions. It took them only 3 hours of deliberation to return a verdict that would bring resolution to some and anguish to others. Dr. Scott Sills, 58 years old, was acquitted of first-degree murder, meaning the jury did not believe the crime had been planned in advance with clear premeditation. However, he was found guilty of second-degree murder, a charge that indicated the jury believed Susan's death had resulted from an intentional act, but without prior calculation. The sentence was handed down shortly after: life imprisonment with the possibility of parole after 15 years. As evening settled over Los Angeles on November 28, 2008, the city began to glow under a canopy of artificial lights. In the hushed atmosphere of a parking structure tucked away in the city, an abrupt and blood-curdling scream shattered the stillness, startling anyone within earshot. A witness later recounted catching a fleeting glimpse of a man in the distance. Due to the dimming light and the man's position, his facial features were obscured. Without hesitation, he leapt into the vehicle and sped away. Within moments of his escape, a shocking discovery was made. A woman was found lying motionless on the concrete. That woman was Pamela. Pamela Goody came into the world on August 31, 1963, in the quiet, mountain-rimmed city of Salt Lake City, Utah. From an early age, Pamela displayed a sharp mind, a resilient spirit, and a hunger for success that would one day propel her into the business world. After completing her education with commendable success, she stepped into adulthood with a deep sense of responsibility and ambition. Although the romance didn't stand the test of time, Pamela found herself embracing the challenge of single motherhood with grace and strength, choosing to raise her child alone and pour herself into creating a stable, nurturing environment. By the late 1980s, Pamela had carved out a career for herself. She was far from idle. Instead, she launched her own business in the jewelry industry, a sector she had long been passionate about. Her entrepreneurial journey began in 1989, when she established a small but promising company dealing in fine jewelry. But despite her professional success, Pamela's personal life remained somewhat unfulfilled. She longed for companionship and stability, a partner with whom she could share both the triumphs and trials of life. This longing came to an end in the mid-1990s, when she crossed paths with James Fayed, an electrician by trade. James was a hard-working, blue-collar man with big dreams of his own. He often spoke of building a life that included not just a family, but also a business he could proudly call his own. When James and Pamela met, there was an immediate and undeniable connection. In 1998, they tied the knot in a modest but joyful wedding ceremony held in the ever-vibrant city of Las Vegas, Nevada. However, the early years of their marriage were marked by hardship. Financial struggles soon emerged as a dark cloud over their seemingly bright union. The jewelry business that Pamela had worked so hard to build began to waver under economic pressures, while James juggled multiple contracts and projects to make ends meet. Things became even more complicated after the birth of their second child. The household expenses increased, and the financial strain became overwhelming. Pamela had to make the difficult decision to seek government assistance in order to provide for her family. James, meanwhile, took on additional work, often accepting jobs that required him to travel for weeks at a time. His profession demanded long hours and frequent out-of-state assignments in order to meet client needs. It wasn't until 2002 that a significant turning point arrived for the couple. Faced with mounting challenges, they made a strategic decision to combine their efforts and start a new business venture together. They founded a company called Goldfinger, a business concept centered around the buying and selling of gold and other valuable items. Initially, they focused on acquiring gold jewelry and collectible coins, which they purchased from individuals looking for quick cash. They would later resell these items at a considerable markup, creating a lucrative revenue stream. This strategic move allowed them to accumulate capital and gradually scale their operations. Goldfinger operated in a way that resembled a pawn shop, though it was positioned more discreetly and catered to clients seeking short-term financial solutions. Customers would bring in their gold items and receive loans in exchange, with their valuables held as collateral. If the loan was repaid on time, the item would be returned to the client. If not, ownership of the gold transferred legally to Pamela and James. Around this time, global gold prices began to surge. By 2008, their stockpile of gold had appreciated significantly. turning their modest operation into a highly profitable enterprise. Their timing couldn't have been better, and the business flourished as a result. But with success came new tensions. Over time, cracks began to form in their marriage. James grew increasingly distant and detached, focusing more on the company's expansion and less on his relationship with Pamela. Simultaneously, James began to experience chronic health issues, including the onset of rheumatoid arthritis, a debilitating condition that made it difficult for him to maintain his demanding schedule and leadership responsibilities. As his health declined, Pamela gradually took on more of the administrative and strategic work to keep the company on track. In April 2007, a seemingly routine conversation would end up shifting the couple's dynamic in a significant way. While at the office, Pamela engaged in a discussion with an old friend named Carl, who operated a similar business in another part of the state. During their conversation, Pamela overheard something that troubled her deeply: the realization that they had never obtained the appropriate license for the type of financial transactions their company was conducting. Disturbed by the oversight, Pamela immediately resolved to correct the issue and ensure that their business complied with all state regulations. She saw this not only as a legal necessity, but also as a step toward long-term security for their company. That same year, on October 6th, Pamela received a check amounting to $400,000, a substantial sum earmarked specifically for covering the costs associated with licensing, legal fees, and mandatory state payments. Her decision to allocate this money toward legitimizing their operation did not sit well with James. From the outset, he dismissed the licensing efforts as a needless and expensive bureaucratic headache. He argued that their business had thrived without it thus far, and viewed Pamela's actions as an overreaction. But for Pamela, this wasn't just about paperwork. It was about protecting their livelihood and preventing future legal complications. This disagreement ignited long-standing tensions that had been quietly brewing beneath the surface. By October 2007, the situation had deteriorated beyond repair. After nearly a decade of marriage, James filed for divorce. The proceedings quickly turned adversarial. His objective became clear: to prevent her from completing the licensing process and to isolate her from any decision-making power within the company. The divorce proceedings between Pamela Goody and James Fayed soon spiraled into a heated and complex legal conflict that few could have anticipated. What began as a standard separation quickly escalated into a full-scale legal war, consuming not just their time and energy, but also their reputations and resources. The primary point of contention was their joint financial assets, specifically their company and shared bank accounts, which reportedly held more than $12 million at the time. Drawing on his legal team and exploiting every loophole available to him, he succeeded in having Pamela removed from any position of authority within the company they had built together. For Pamela, this was more than just a legal maneuver. It was a deeply personal blow. She had invested more than just money. She had given her time, her creative energy, and her trust. Her removal from the company not only stripped her of her role, but also erased her presence from the business that had once been her pride. Despite having been a wealthy woman not long before, Pamela now found herself in a precarious financial position. In order to continue fighting the legal battle, she had to borrow money just to afford the services of a competent legal team. This reversal of fortune, going from a multimillionaire entrepreneur to someone dependent on borrowed funds, was both humbling and heartbreaking. To make matters worse, James also took steps to sever Pamela's professional relationships. Pamela herself felt betrayed. She believed this campaign to discredit her was not only unnecessary but also deeply unethical. She had helped build Goldfinger from the ground up, contributing her expertise, connections, and tireless work ethic. In her eyes, this attempt to isolate her professionally was not just an attack on her business standing, but an attack on her identity. However, Pamela's challenges did not end with legal and financial issues. Not long after the divorce proceedings intensified, she learned that federal authorities had begun investigating Goldfinger for possible financial irregularities. Pamela was alarmed to discover that she herself was being scrutinized for potential fraud. The allegations came as a shock, particularly given her recent efforts to legitimize the business and obtain all necessary licenses. Fortunately, Pamela was ultimately cleared of any wrongdoing. The court reaffirmed her ownership stake in the company, acknowledging that her contributions had been both legitimate and substantial. For Pamela, it was a small but meaningful victory. After months of feeling powerless, she had reclaimed a part of what she had lost. But just as things appeared to be turning around, tragedy struck. On the evening of November 28, 2008, as daylight faded and the city's lights flickered on, a sudden and chilling scream pierced the calm of a parking structure in Los Angeles. Office workers, still leaving their jobs and heading to their cars, paused in alarm. One witness reported catching a glimpse of a man, his features obscured by the fading light and distance, who appeared to sprint away from the scene. The stranger jumped into a red SUV and sped off before anyone could intervene. Moments later, a woman was discovered lying on the ground near where the vehicle had been seen. It was Pamela. Although clearly injured, Pamela managed to pull herself up briefly. Witnesses recalled her turning toward one of the bystanders and pleading for help before collapsing again. Emergency services were quickly summoned. Police and medical personnel arrived at the scene within minutes. Paramedics provided immediate first aid and rushed her toward the nearest hospital. Despite their efforts, the injuries she sustained proved too severe. Tragically, Pamela passed away en route to the hospital. The Los Angeles Police Department immediately launched a full-scale investigation. Officers began interviewing the witness who had seen the fleeing vehicle, hoping to gather clues that might point to the identity of the assailant. Unfortunately, the witness was unable to offer a detailed description of the man, having only seen him for a few seconds. Still, security footage from the parking lot confirmed the witness's account. A red SUV had indeed exited the structure just moments after the scream was heard. Interestingly, there were no signs of theft. Pamela's handbag, jewelry, and other personal items were untouched. This led investigators to a chilling conclusion. The motive likely wasn't robbery. Rather, it seemed that Pamela had been specifically targeted. The deliberate nature of the act raised questions about who might have wanted to harm her, and why. In homicide investigations, especially those involving prominent individuals, the people closest to the victim are often examined first. In this case, James Fayed became an immediate person of interest. Not only had he been embroiled in a bitter legal dispute with Pamela, but he also stood to benefit financially from her absence. On the day of her death, the former couple had met with their respective attorneys, still attempting to resolve their disagreements over business assets and ownership rights. The law office they visited was located in the very same building as the parking lot where Pamela was later found. According to detectives, after the legal meeting concluded, Pamela left the office alone and walked to her vehicle, which was parked on the third level of the parking structure. Investigators noted that James would have known her schedule and location that day. This detail was critical, as it could have provided both motive and opportunity. Some within the investigative team believed that this combination of knowledge and animosity pointed to James as a potential orchestrator of the attack. However, when questioned, James denied any involvement. He remained calm and composed throughout the interrogation, firmly maintaining that he had no role in what had happened. His legal team provided a strong alibi, supported by the presence of James at the law office during the relevant time, as well as video footage confirming his location. Additionally, his attorney and other witnesses attested to his whereabouts during the key window of time. Faced with these facts, investigators had no choice but to release him. All surveillance footage from the surrounding area, including internal garage cameras, external parking structure feeds, and nearby traffic cameras, was quickly collected and turned over to law enforcement authorities. This footage became a critical part of the investigation and allowed detectives to piece together a more complete timeline of events leading up to the tragic incident. One thing stood out almost immediately. Among the many people captured on video was James Fayed himself. After the meeting with attorneys earlier that day, he was seen calmly exiting the office building. What struck the detectives was how composed, almost unnaturally relaxed James appeared, despite the surrounding chaos that had begun to unfold after Pamela's scream. Witnesses in the area were startled and visibly shaken, and several had rushed to see what had happened. Yet James, who had only recently concluded a tense legal discussion with his former spouse, walked away with what investigators described as an eerily unaffected demeanor. Detectives noted that such behavior can sometimes indicate foreknowledge, an understanding of what was about to occur, leading to a conscious decision to avoid being present during the discovery of the incident. Though not definitive evidence on its own, it was enough to keep James firmly in the crosshairs of the ongoing investigation. As police continued to review the footage frame by frame, a clearer picture of the actual attack began to emerge. Pamela had left the building and was walking toward her vehicle, which was parked on the third floor of the structure. From the angle of the footage, investigators could see that a red SUV, the same vehicle mentioned by witnesses, had been slowly circling the upper levels of the parking lot minutes before Pamela arrived. It then stopped in a nearby row, almost as if lying in wait. As Pamela approached her car and reached into her purse for the keys, the SUV moved abruptly and came to a stop in a position that appeared to block her in. At that precise moment, a figure leaped from the back seat and moved swiftly toward her. Though the actual assault was not clearly captured due to camera angles, the speed and precision of the person's movements suggested that the act was carefully planned. Pamela had been watched, tracked, and intercepted. From there, investigators shifted their focus to the vehicle itself. By tracking the license plate, they discovered that the SUV had been rented just 2 days earlier from a well-known car rental company located near downtown Los Angeles. The rental agreement provided law enforcement with a new set of leads. Once the vehicle was located and secured, forensic teams carried out an extensive analysis of the interior. They searched for fingerprints, hair, fabric fibers, and any other trace materials that could offer clues. Their diligence paid off. In the narrow seams of the rear seat upholstery, forensic specialists discovered a small amount of DNA evidence, most likely left behind by someone who had recently crouched or moved quickly through the area. Even more promising, surveillance cameras in and around the parking garage had captured clear images of 3 individuals who had either entered or exited the SUV at various times. The clarity of the images allowed authorities to run facial recognition comparisons and eventually match them with names in law enforcement databases. The trio identified were Jose Moya, Gabriel Marquez, and Steven Moya. Of the 3, Jose Moya stood out immediately. He was not just a random individual with a criminal background. He had long-standing personal ties to both James and Pamela. For several years, Jose had worked on the Fayed family's private estate, helping to maintain the ranch and managing various domestic tasks. He was known to the family and had even attended several private events hosted by the couple. When investigators compared the attacker's silhouette and physical build captured on camera with photographs of Jose, the resemblance was striking. This, combined with his known association with the Fayed family, elevated Jose from a person of interest to a prime suspect. With appropriate legal clearance, they accessed cell phone records, GPS logs, and call histories. The results were revealing. Data indicated that both Gabriel and Steven's mobile devices had pinged off a cell tower located just 100 meters from the parking structure at the approximate time of the incident. These devices had not only been in the vicinity, they had remained there for a significant window of time before and after the event. These details, when considered alongside the forensic evidence and surveillance footage, painted a picture of a coordinated operation. Each new piece of data added to the growing stack of evidence that suggested this was more than just a crime of passion. It was a calculated attempt to remove someone who had become a threat to certain interests. As the net tightened around the trio, federal agencies began to take interest. Once news of the attack intersected with an ongoing financial investigation into the Goldfinger Company, both the FBI and Internal Revenue Service, IRS, formally joined the case. What they uncovered added a whole new dimension to the story. Authorities discovered that the Fayed family business had been operating through a web of shell companies and front organizations, one of which was deeply entangled in a suspected money laundering operation. The scale of the operation was significant. Millions of dollars were being cycled through fake invoices, sham transactions, and off-the-book sales, eventually being laundered through a partner company with international reach. 2 fraudulent financial schemes were uncovered in the process, one involving inflated asset valuations to acquire illicit loans, and another that used gold purchases to obscure the origin of funds. In hindsight, Pamela's push to obtain official licensing for Goldfinger in 2007, an act that had caused so much friction with James, made perfect sense. She had unknowingly stumbled into a dangerous world of concealed accounts and false records. The spotlight also returned to Jose Moya. The investigation assumed that he had infiltrated the family of the wealthy couple for a reason, but he categorically denied that he had any involvement at all. In order to put this man behind bars for a long time, much more was needed than just surveillance camera footage. James was soon charged with conducting illegal financial operations, a serious white-collar offense that carried substantial prison time. It turned out that Pamela's actions in the months leading up to the incident were no coincidence. Her sudden interest in obtaining proper licensing and paying outstanding business fees had a deeper motive. Unbeknownst to many, Pamela had already been contacted by the FBI shortly before her death. The timing of this contact proved crucial. It was during these initial meetings with federal agents that Pamela learned the disturbing truth about her husband's activities. Years of financial records and business dealings were beginning to show signs of fraudulent activity, implicating James in schemes that funneled illicit money through the family business. Pamela, committed to doing the right thing, had agreed to cooperate with federal investigators. She was preparing to hand over a trove of documents and evidence during a planned meeting, evidence that could have permanently dismantled James's operation and led to a cascade of legal consequences. According to federal agents, they had no doubt that James had discovered her cooperation. Whether through intercepted communications or subtle behavioral changes, it became evident to him that his former spouse was about to expose everything. That realization, they believed, may have led him to the conclusion that she had to be silenced before she could jeopardize everything he had built. August 2008. James Fayed, then 45 years old, was arrested at his sprawling ranch. The operation was conducted early in the morning by FBI agents who had obtained an arrest warrant based on the financial evidence they had compiled. James appeared stunned by the presence of law enforcement, though he remained composed as agents read him the list of charges. Without resistance, he requested his attorney and was taken into federal custody. In the days that followed, James continued to assert his innocence, dismissing the charges as exaggerated or misconstrued. Internal records, witness statements, and bank transfers all pointed to James as the mastermind behind the misuse of funds. Not long after his arrest for financial crimes, James was also formally charged with orchestrating the murder of his ex-wife. However, this charge proved harder to substantiate. Despite strong suspicions and circumstantial evidence, direct proof linking him to the planning of the crime was elusive. Phone records and digital correspondence among the suspected participants had been carefully deleted. Then, in a surprising turn of events, an unexpected opportunity arose from within the very jail where James was being held. One of his cellmates, a man named Smith, came forward to share concerns about James's behavior. Smith claimed that although James was polite and charismatic, he often made veiled references to problems that would go away soon, and hinted that people sometimes had to take care of things themselves. Detectives saw potential in this. With Smith's cooperation, and under legal authorization, they arranged for him to wear a concealed listening device in hopes of capturing an unguarded confession. In exchange, Smith hoped for a reduced sentence in his own pending case. The very same evening, he returned to the shared cell and struck up a deep, personal conversation with James. Over the course of the recorded exchange, James made a chilling admission. Believing Smith to be trustworthy, he opened up about what had really happened. He explained how he had enlisted Jose Moya, a former employee and someone who had been around the Fayed estate for years, to carry out the attack. James admitted to offering Moya $225,000 for the job, a sum large enough to ensure cooperation and silence. But what was perhaps even more alarming was what James said next. He revealed that once the crime had been committed, his next step was to eliminate Moya himself. His plan had been to hire a second individual to permanently silence the first, thus removing the one person who could connect him to the murder. This second hit was never carried out, but the intent alone demonstrated the level of calculation involved. Further investigation revealed that Jose Moya had not acted alone. He had later involved two other individuals, Gabriel Marquez and Stephen Moya, to assist him. Surveillance footage from the parking lot, which had been thoroughly analyzed months earlier, showed all three men together in the red SUV, confirming their involvement at the scene. Authorities concluded that Jose was likely the primary attacker, while the other two were there to provide backup and ensure the plan's success. The complexity of the case, combined with the layers of financial and criminal charges, meant that the prosecution required nearly 3 years to prepare for trial. Dozens of witnesses were interviewed, records were reconstructed, and expert testimonies were gathered to paint a full picture of the events. One of the more surprising witnesses was James's own sister, Mary Fayed. She testified under oath that she had once dated Jose Moya and had been approached by her brother to participate in the planning. She had refused, but admitted she was deeply unsettled by the request. Mary also disclosed that she later shared this information with James's other sister, Patty, who, in turn, made a shocking suggestion. According to testimony, Patty proposed that her own husband, a law enforcement officer in Wyoming, could potentially carry out the act in exchange for money. Ultimately, the district attorney's office was able to secure a conviction. With overwhelming evidence, including the secret recording from jail, the financial trail, and testimonies from those close to the defendant, the jury delivered a unanimous verdict. James Fayed was found guilty of first-degree murder and conspiracy to commit murder. In a final ruling that marked the end of a long and complex case, the judge sentenced James to death, describing his actions as those of a person who had manipulated, deceived, and destroyed lives for personal gain. Jose Moya, along with his 2 accomplices, was found guilty of carrying out a contract killing. All 3 were sentenced to life in prison without the possibility of parole.